21. The 17th murder. I dreamed I was sitting on a bench in Baltimore, facing the tumbling fountain in Harlem Park beside a woman who wore a veil. I'd come there with her. She was somebody I knew well, but I had suddenly forgotten who she was. I couldn't see her face because of the long black veil. I thought that if I said something to her, I would recognize her voice when she answered. But I was very embarrassed and was a long time finding anything to say. Finally, I asked her if she knew a man named Carroll T. Harris. She answered me, but the roar and swish of the tumbling fountain smothered her voice, and I could hear nothing. Fire engines went out Edmondson Avenue. She left me to run after them. As she ran, she cried, "Fire! Fire!" I recognized her voice then and knew who she was and knew she was someone important to me. I ran after her, but it was too late. She and the fire engines were gone. I walked streets hunting for her. Half the streets in the United States, Gay Street and Mount Royal Avenue in Baltimore, Colfax Avenue in Denver, Etna Road and St. Clair Avenue in Cleveland, McKinney Avenue in Dallas, Lamartine and Cornell and Amory Streets in Boston, Berry Boulevard in Louisville, Lexington Avenue in New York, until I came to Victoria Street in Jacksonville, where I heard her voice again, though I still could not see her. I walked more streets, listening to her voice. She was calling a name, not mine, one strange to me, but no matter how fast I walked or in what direction, I could get no nearer her voice. It was the same distance from me in the street that runs past the Federal Building in El Paso as in Detroit's Grand Circus Park. Then the voice stopped. Tired and discouraged, I went into the lobby of the hotel that faces the railroad station in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, to rest. While I sat there, a train came in. She got off it and came into the lobby, over to me, and began kissing me. I was very uncomfortable because everybody stood around looking at us and laughing. That dream ended there. I dreamed I was in a strange city hunting for a man I hated. I had an open knife in my pocket and meant to kill him with it when I found him. It was Sunday morning. Church bells were ringing. Crowds of people were in the streets going to and from church. I walked almost as far as in the first dream, but always in this same strange city. Then the man I was after yelled at me, and I saw him. He was a small, brown man who wore an immense sombrero. He was standing on the steps of a tall building on the far side of a wide plaza, laughing at me. Between us, the plaza was crowded with people, packed shoulder to shoulder. Keeping one hand on the open knife in my pocket, I ran toward the little brown man, running on the heads and shoulders of the people in the plaza. The heads and shoulders were of unequal heights and not evenly spaced. I slipped and floundered over them. The little brown man stood on the steps and laughed until I'd almost reached him. Then he ran into the tall building. I chased him up miles of spiral stairway, always just an inch more than a hand's reach behind him. We came to the roof. He ran straight across to the edge and jumped just as one of my hands touched him. His shoulder slid out of my fingers. My hand knocked his sombrero off and closed on his head. It was a smooth, hard, round head, no larger than a large egg. My fingers went all the way around it. Squeezing his head in one hand, I tried to bring the knife out of my pocket with the other and realized that I had gone off the edge of the roof with him. We dropped giddily down towards the millions of upturned faces in the plaza, miles down. I opened my eyes, and the dull light of morning sun filtered through drawn blinds. I was lying face down on the dining room floor, my head resting on my left forearm. My right arm was stretched straight out. My right hand held the round blue and white handle of Dinah Brand's ice pick. The pick's 6-inch needle-sharp blade was buried in Dinah Brand's left breast. She was lying on her back, dead. Her long, muscular legs were stretched out toward the kitchen door. There was a run down the front of her right stocking. Slowly, gently, as if afraid of awakening her, I let go the ice pick, drew in my arm, and got up. My eyes burned. My throat and mouth were hot, woolly. I went into the kitchen, found a bottle of gin, tilted it to my mouth, and kept it there until I had to breathe. The kitchen clock said 7:41. With the gin in me, I returned to the dining room, switched on the lights, and looked at the dead girl. Not much blood was in sight. A spot the size of a silver dollar around the hole the ice pick made in her blue silk dress. There was a bruise on her right cheek just under the cheekbone. Another bruise, finger-made, was on her right wrist. Her hands were empty. I moved her enough to see that nothing was under her. I examined the room. So far as I could tell, nothing had been changed in it. I went back to the kitchen and found no recognizable changes there. The spring lock on the back door was fastened and had no marks to show it had been monkeyed with. I went to the front door and failed to find any marks on it. I went through the house from top to bottom and learned nothing. The windows were all right. The girl's jewelry on her dressing table, except the 2 diamond rings on her hands, and $400 in her handbag on a bedroom chair, were undisturbed. In the dining room again, I knelt beside the dead girl and used my handkerchief to wipe the ice pick handle clean of any prints my fingers had left on it. I did the same to glasses, bottles, doors, light buttons, and the pieces of furniture I had touched or was likely to have touched. Then I washed my hands, examined my clothes for blood, made sure I was leaving none of my property behind, and went to the front door. I opened it, wiped the inner knob, closed it behind me, wiped the outer knob, and went away. From a drugstore in Upper Broadway, I telephoned Dick Foley and asked him to come over to my hotel. He arrived a few minutes after I got there. Dinah Brand was killed in her house last night or early this morning, I told him. Stabbed with an ice pick. The police don't know it yet. I've told you enough about her for you to know that there are any number of people who might have had reason for killing her. There are 3 I want looked up first. Whisper, Dan Rolfe, and Bill Quint, the radical fellow. You've got their descriptions. Rolfe is in the hospital with a dented skull. I don't know which hospital. Try the city first. Get hold of Mickey Linehan. He's still camped on Pete the Finn's trail. And have him let Pete rest while he gives you a hand on this. Find out where those 3 birds were last night. And time means something. The little Canadian op had been watching me curiously while I talked. Now he started to say something, changed his mind, grunted, righto, and departed. I went out to look for Reno Starkey. After an hour of searching, I located him by telephone in a Ronnie Street rooming house. By yourself? He asked, when I had said I wanted to see him. Yeah. He said I could come out and told me how to get there. I took a taxi. It was a dingy 2-story house near the edge of town. A couple of men loitered in front of a grocer's on the corner above. Another pair sat on the low wooden steps of the house down at the next corner. None of the 4 was conspicuously refined in appearance. When I rang the bell, 2 men opened the door. They weren't so mild-looking either. I was taken upstairs to a front room where Reno, collarless and in shirt sleeves and vest, sat tilted back in a chair with his feet on the windowsill. He nodded his sallow face and said, "Pull a chair over." The men who had brought me up went away, closing the door. I sat down and said, "I want an alibi. Dinah Brand was killed last night after I left her. There's no chance of my being copped for it, but with Noonan dead, I don't know how I'm hitched up with the department. I don't want to give them any openings to even try to hang anything on me. If I've got to, I could prove where I was last night, but you can save me a lot of trouble if you will." Reno looked at me with dull eyes and asked, "Why pick on me? You phoned me there last night. You're the only person who knows I was there the first part of the night. I'd have to fix it with you even if I got the alibi somewhere else, wouldn't I?" He asked, "You didn't croak her, did you?" I said no, casually. He stared out the window a little while before he spoke. He asked, "What made you think I'd give you the lift? Do I owe you anything for what you'd done to me at Wilson's last night?" I said I didn't hurt you any. The news was half out anyhow. Whisper knew enough to guess the rest. I only gave you a showdown. What do you care? You can take care of yourself. I aim to try, he agreed. All right, you was at the Tanner house, in Tanner. It's a little burg 20-30 miles up the hill. You went up there after you left Wilson's and stayed till morning. A guy named Ricker that hangs around Murray's with a hire heap drove you up and back. You ought to know what you was doing up there. Give me your cig and I'll have it put on the register. Thanks, I said, as I unscrewed my fountain pen. Don't say them. I'm doing this because I need all the friends I can get. When the time comes that you sit in with me and Whisper and Pete, I don't expect the sour end of it. You won't get it, I promised. Who's going to be chief of police? McGraw's acting chief. He'll likely cinch it. How'll he play? With the Finn. Rough stuff will hurt his shop just like it does Pete's. It'll have to be hurt some. I'd be a swell mutt to sit still while a guy like Whisper's on the loose. It's me or him. Think he croaked abroad? He had reason enough, I said, as I gave him the slip of paper on which I had written my name. She double-crossed him, sold him out, plenty. You and her was kind of thick, wasn't you? He asked. I left the question alone, lighting a cigarette. Reno waited a while and then said, You better hunt up Ricker and let him get a look at you so he'll know how to describe you if he's asked. A long-legged youngster at 22 or so with a thin, freckled face around reckless eyes opened the door and came into the room. Reno introduced him to me as Hank O'Mara. I stood up to shake his hand and then asked Reno, "Can I reach you here if I need to?" "No Pete Murray?" "I've met him and I know his joint." "Anything you give him will get to me," he said. "We're getting out of here. It's not so good. That Tanner lay is all set." "Right. Thanks." I went out of the house.